But he loves you. Please, Bella, don't do this. I froze mid-step on the courthouse stairs, the morning sun casting long shadows on the concrete. Owen stood behind me, his voice strained with desperation, and for a brief moment, I almost felt pity for him. Almost. The papers in my hand were still warm from the clerk's office, the weight of what I had just done sinking into me like a long-awaited promise to myself. My name is Bella. I'm 29, and today I filed for divorce from the man I once believed I would spend my life with. Standing there on those steps in Memphis, the humidity already thick, even though it was barely past 9 a.m., I realized love should never hurt this much for this long. Owen reached me, his hand pausing near my elbow as if he feared touching me. He had been Tyler's best friend since childhood, the godfather to the child we never had, the man who stood beside my husband at our wedding 4 years ago, tears in his eyes, giving a speech about forever. You don't understand, Owen said, his breath short from running to catch up. Tyler is struggling right now. Whatever happened between you, it can be fixed. Counseling, time, whatever you need. Just don't throw everything away over one rough patch. I looked at him. Really looked at him. Owen was a good man by all accounts. A project manager at a downtown construction firm, someone who remembered birthdays and helped when you needed to move furniture. Married to his college sweetheart Fiona for 6 years, they appeared perfect, envy-inducing at dinner parties, while I sat next to my own husband, feeling like a stranger in my own home. One rough patch, I repeated, the words bitter on my tongue. Owen, do you know how long I've been fighting for this marriage? Do you know what it feels like to wake up next to someone who barely sees you? His expression shifted, confusion or discomfort, I couldn't tell. I know Tyler can be distant. He's always been that way, even as a kid. But that doesn't mean he doesn't love you. Love. The word felt hollow now, stripped of meaning by years of excuses, gaslighting, and a loneliness that settles in your chest when you realize you're the only one trying. Let me ask you something, Owen. When was the last time Tyler mentioned me to you? Or talked about our future, our plans, anything that suggested he saw me as more than a roommate who shares his bed? Owen opened his mouth, then closed it. The silence said it all. I met Tyler 6 years ago at a friend's birthday party. He was confident and charming, commanding attention when he entered a room. I was 23, working my first real job as an interior designer at a small residential renovation firm. Tyler, an accountant at a mid-sized company, was ambitious and driven. And when he looked at me, I felt truly seen for the first time. We dated for 2 years before he proposed. The wedding was at a historic plantation outside Memphis, string lights and magnolias everywhere, the kind of day that promised forever. My parents cried, my friends cheered, and I walked down that aisle believing I had found my person. But slowly, the fairy tale unraveled. It wasn't one dramatic event. It was thousands of small cuts, a gradual erosion of everything we had built. Tyler started working late, missing dinners I'd spent hours preparing. He stopped asking about my day, my work, my dreams. Conversations felt like we were speaking different languages, each word lost in the space between us. I tried everything. I suggested date nights, only for him to cancel at the last minute. I planned weekend getaways, which he rescheduled due to work emergencies. I attended therapy alone, trying to understand what I was doing wrong and why I couldn't seem to reach the man I had married. And every time I raised my concerns, Tyler brushed them off with a dismissive wave and that condescending smile, making me feel like I was overreacting for wanting more than what we had become. Bella, Owen's voice brought me back to the present. Whatever is happening, running away isn't the solution. Tyler needs you. I almost laughed. Needs me. Not wants me, needs me. Like I was some utility, a convenience, something to return to when he was done with whatever truly held his attention. I am not running away, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. I was finally standing still long enough to see what had been right in front of me for years. The truth had been there all along. I just hadn't wanted to face it. The first time I truly sensed something was wrong was about 18 months ago. Tyler and I had been invited to Owen and Fiona's house for a dinner party, one of those gatherings where couples try to make their lives seem more exciting than Netflix and takeout. Fiona had prepared an elaborate meal, 3 courses with matching napkins, and Tyler was lively in a way I hadn't seen in months. He laughed at Fiona's jokes, praised her cooking, and leaned in when she spoke, as though her words were the most fascinating thing he had ever heard. Meanwhile, I sat across the table, watching my husband come alive for another woman, telling myself I was imagining it. Fiona was effortlessly beautiful, with long auburn hair that always looked styled, even if she claimed she just rolled out of bed, and green eyes that sparkled when she smiled. She worked part-time at a boutique marketing firm, but was passionate about painting. Her artwork decorated their home, abstract pieces in bold colors I genuinely admired. Owen adored her. That much was obvious to anyone who saw them together. He looked at her with the wonder and devotion I wished Tyler would show me. But Tyler's gaze was different. It lingered too long. His compliments were too pointed, and when Fiona brushed past him to refill his wine glass, I caught a flash in his expression that made my stomach drop. I told myself I was being paranoid. Tyler and Fiona had known each other almost as long as Tyler and Owen had. They were just friends. Even if he found her attractive, that didn't mean anything. People could appreciate beauty without acting on it. That was my mantra, repeated to silence the voice in my head warning me something was wrong. Still, the signs kept growing. Tyler mentioned Fiona more often than necessary, referenced her opinions in unrelated conversations, and at group gatherings he gravitated toward her, leaving me to small talk with anyone nearby while he hung on her every word. I began observing them closely. Tyler's hand brushing Fiona's arm, the way she laughed at his jokes with her entire body, the subtle exits they took to refill drinks or use the restroom, returning with flushed cheeks and avoiding eye contact. Yet I confronted no one. What would I even say? My husband seemed to enjoy talking to his best friend's wife. That alone wasn't proof, just my insecurity. Tyler had a way of making me feel every concern I raised was an overreaction. "You're too sensitive," he'd say. "You read too much into things. Fiona is like a sister to me. Owen is my best friend. Why ruin that with jealousy?" So, I swallowed my doubts, smiled at gatherings, and pretended everything was fine. I convinced myself the distance between us was normal, that all marriages had rough patches. If I tried harder, loved more, and was more understanding, things would improve. They didn't. They worsened. Tyler started coming home later, claiming work emergencies. One evening, I called his office to offer dinner, only to be told he had left hours ago. When I confronted him, he accused me of being suffocating and controlling. I stopped asking, stopped planning, stopped trying to bridge the gap. Instead, I immersed myself in work, taking on more projects and staying late because coming home to emptiness, or a husband who barely acknowledged me, was more painful than the loneliness at the office. Friends noticed the change. My mother's calls carried concern disguised as casual chat. I kept up the act, insisting everything was fine, that Tyler and I were busy but working on our marriage. The lie became easier to repeat, until I almost believed it myself. Then, 3 weeks ago, everything shifted. I had come home early from a client meeting that was canceled last minute. Tyler's car was in the driveway. Surprising since he'd said he'd be at the office until at least 8. A flutter of hope stirred as I approached the front door, thinking maybe, just maybe, we could finally have dinner together and talk. The house was still when I walked in, but Tyler's briefcase sat on the kitchen counter, his keys carelessly dropped beside it. I called his name and waited, but there was no answer. I checked the rooms downstairs and found them empty, then headed up toward our bedroom. The door was slightly open, and through the narrow opening I heard voices, Tyler's, and a woman's voice that was clearly not mine. I pushed the door wider, my heart racing so intensely I could feel it in my chest. There they were, my husband and Fiona, entwined in our bed, in the same sheets I had cleaned that morning. They froze mid-movement and turned toward me, their faces reflecting the same shock. Everything seemed to stop. Noise faded away. I stood in that doorway for what felt like forever, watching the life I believed in fall apart before me. The days that followed blended into a fog of disbelief and pain. I did not yell when I saw them. I did not cry. I simply turned around, went back down the stairs, and drove to a downtown hotel where I checked in under my maiden name. Tyler called 17 times before midnight. I ignored every call. His voicemails shifted from remorseful to frantic, then to angry, cycling through his own fear while I lay on a stiff hotel bed, staring at the ceiling and questioning how I had missed something so devastating happening so close to me. Fiona called twice. I erased those messages without listening. By morning, I had reached a decision. It was not driven by anger or impulse, but by a clear understanding that came from finally seeing the truth. My marriage had ended long ago. I had been too scared, too optimistic, too determined to admit it. What I witnessed was not the end of something wonderful, it was confirmation of a loss that had already occurred. I returned home the next day, while Tyler was at work. I packed 2 suitcases with necessities, took my laptop and the jewelry my grandmother had given me, and left a note on the kitchen counter that read, "I saw everything. Do not contact me. My lawyer will reach out." Then I drove to my parents' house. My mother held me as I finally allowed myself to cry, while my father paced the room, quietly expressing all the anger he felt toward the man who had hurt his daughter. The next 3 weeks passed in a rush of legal meetings, tense calls, and the difficult task of separating a life that had been shared for 6 years. Tyler came to my parents' house twice, insisting on talking and claiming he could explain. Both times, my father sent him away with words I had never heard him use before. Fiona said nothing. Through mutual contacts, I learned she had told Owen she was visiting her sister for a few weeks due to a family emergency. Owen, loyal and trusting, accepted her story without doubt. I considered telling him. I truly did, but something stopped me. Part of it was self-preservation. I needed to deal with my own pain before adding someone else's. Another part was fear that he would not believe me, that he would side with Tyler, that I would be seen as a bitter wife unwilling to accept the end of her marriage. So I stayed silent. I focused on the divorce, on dividing what we owned, and on ending the legal ties binding me to a man who had stopped loving me long before he turned his attention elsewhere. Then Owen appeared at the courthouse. "Bella, please." His voice sounded worn now, stripped of the confidence he had arrived with. "Just tell me what happened." Tyler didn't say much, only that you had left him, that you had been unhappy for some time, that he tried to fix things, but you wouldn't allow it. Whatever he did, he was sorry. He wanted another chance. At that moment, I felt something shift inside me. All the silence, all the hidden truths, all the careful tiptoeing around what was inevitably going to be revealed, I was exhausted. I was tired of carrying it all, of protecting people who had never protected me. "You want to know why I filed for divorce?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Owen nodded, eyes searching for an explanation that could make sense of the chaos. "Because your wife has been sleeping with my husband for at least 18 months, I said. "Because 3 weeks ago, I came home early and found them in my bed, in my own house, destroying everything I believed I had. Because Tyler loves Fiona far more than he ever loved me. And the worst part, Owen, I think he always has." The words hung heavy between us, sharp and undeniable. I watched Owen's face change as comprehension dawned. Confusion shifted to disbelief, then to a horror that seemed to age him decades and seconds. "That's not," he began, swallowing hard, trying again. "Fiona wouldn't. She loves me. We're trying to have a baby. We just talked about starting a family last month." "I know," I said softly, and I meant it. I had believed Tyler loved me too. I thought we were building a life together. I had believed many things that turned out to be false. Owen staggered back, gripping the courthouse railing as if he might collapse without it. I watched him absorb my words, saw the precise moment denial broke and acceptance settled in. A strange kinship formed between us despite everything. We had both been deceived. Both had trusted people undeserving of that trust. Both had spent years in relationships that were empty at their core, held together only by our own willingness to ignore warning signs. "I'm sorry," I said, and I truly was, not for telling the truth, but for the pain it would inevitably cause. I had considered keeping it to myself, letting Owen remain in the dark as I once had. But he deserved the truth. He deserved the opportunity to make decisions based on reality, not the lies she had fed him. He didn't respond. He simply stood there, clutching the railing, staring at nothing while his world unraveled. I turned and walked down the courthouse steps into the Memphis morning. The divorce papers were filed. The truth had been spoken. And for the first time in years, I could breathe. Behind me, I heard Owen sit heavily on the steps. I did not look back. Whatever would happen next would unfold in time. My role in maintaining their secret was finished. The next step was rebuilding a life from the ruins they had left behind. The fallout was rapid and merciless. Within 48 hours of my courthouse conversation with Owen, the facade Tyler and Fiona had meticulously maintained began to crumble. Owen confronted Fiona at home that day. She denied everything initially, crying and swearing she would never betray him. But armed with the details I had shared, the dates, the patterns, the evidence I had unintentionally collected over 18 months of suspicion, Owen did not believe her that he had discovered the texts hidden in a folder on Fiona's phone. Hundreds of messages between her and Tyler, documenting their affair in explicit detail. There were declarations of love, plans for secret meetings, and complaints about their spouses, who were too blind to see what was happening. That phrase struck me harder than I expected when Owen mentioned it later. Too blind to see, as if trust, love, and commitment were flaws instead of the foundation of a true partnership. By the end of the week, Fiona had moved out. Initially, she had nowhere to go, having burned bridges with the lie about visiting her sister. She stayed in a short-term rental downtown while figuring out her next steps. Tyler remained alone in the house we had shared, sending desperate emails and voicemails that I deleted without opening. My parents' home became my refuge during those first weeks. My mother kept my favorite tea ready, and my father made sure to take me to dinner twice a week, reminding me life continued beyond my fractured marriage. My younger sister called nightly from Nashville, her voice a steady anchor as I processed the chaos. But Owen surprised me the most. 4 days after the courthouse confrontation, he called. His voice was rough with fatigue, but steadier than I expected. He asked to meet for coffee, not to discuss Tyler or Fiona, not to revisit the affair, but just to talk, to be with someone who understood. I agreed, unsure why. Perhaps it was hearing recognition in his voice, the same hollow tone I felt when I saw myself in the mirror. Perhaps curiosity about how he was managing the collapse of his life. Or perhaps it was simply the need to be around someone who didn't pity me, who saw me as a fellow survivor rather than a victim. We met at a quiet coffee shop in Cooper Young, an artsy neighborhood far from the suburban streets Tyler and I had known. Owen was already there, sitting in a corner booth with a dark, steaming cup, eyes fixed on the window, wary as if expecting something unknown. "Thank you for coming," he said as I sat down. "I know this is awkward. We don't really know each other outside of them." "We know each other," I corrected gently. "We've just always known each other through them. Maybe it's time to change that." A faint smile crossed his face, the first I'd seen since that courthouse morning. "Yeah, maybe it is." That first day, we talked for 3 hours, not about Tyler or Fiona. Instead, we discussed ourselves, the parts of our identities that had been buried in our marriages and were now resurfacing. Owen shared stories of his childhood in rural Arkansas and his early dreams of becoming an architect, redirected by practical choices. I spoke about my work as an interior designer, the projects I loved, and the sense of purpose they gave me. It felt strange to discover someone I had known for years, through social gatherings and shared connections, as a complete person. Owen had always been Tyler's friend, Fiona's husband, a supporting character in my story. But now, with those connections severed, something new was forming. We began meeting regularly. Coffee became lunch. Lunch became occasional dinners at restaurants we had never visited with our spouses. There was nothing romantic, nothing of betrayal, just two people weathering the same storm, finding comfort in each other's presence. My friends were skeptical. "Isn't that weird?" my coworker Jasmine asked. "He's Tyler's friend. Isn't there a rule against that?" "What rule?" I asked. "The rule that says I should stay alone because the person who understands me best was friends with the man who ruined my life." Owen had done nothing wrong. He had been a victim of this, just as much as I was. Jasmine shrugged, unconvinced, but I understood her worry. From the outside, it may have looked strange, even suspicious. But for me, living through the aftermath and rebuilding a future from fragments, Owen's friendship was a lifeline. He never asked me to forgive Tyler or suggested the affair was my fault. He simply listened, shared his experiences, and reminded me I wasn't alone. Gradually, I began to feel like myself again. Then, about 6 weeks after the divorce was finalized, a twist came on a Thursday evening. Owen and I were at a small Italian restaurant near the river, one of those hidden gems with checkered tablecloths and candles and wine bottles. We were discussing my design project for a local bed and breakfast when he suddenly went quiet. "What is it?" I asked, noticing his jaw tighten. He took a long breath. I need to tell you something. Something I should have said weeks ago, but didn't know how. My stomach tightened with familiar anxiety. In my experience, conversations that began with, I need to tell you something, rarely ended well. Okay, I'm listening, I said. I suspected, Owen admitted, words spilling out as if he had held them in for too long, about Fiona and Tyler. I suspected something months before you told me the truth. Maybe even longer. I stared at him, unsure how to react. You knew? I asked. Not knew, suspected. There's a difference. He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit I had come to recognize. There were signs, little things that didn't add up. Fiona always texting someone when she thought I wasn't looking. Getting defensive when I asked about her day. Caring more about how she looked, even when we weren't going anywhere special. But you never said anything. What was I supposed to say? Hey, I think my wife might be cheating, but I have no proof and I'm probably paranoid? He laughed bitterly. I convinced myself I was imagining things, that Fiona loved me, that she would never betray me. I pushed the doubts down every time and told myself suspicion would poison our marriage. I thought about all the times I noticed Tyler's attention wandering toward Fiona and talked myself out of trusting my instincts. I did the same, I admitted. I saw it too, the way Tyler looked at her, how they always seemed drawn to each other. But I didn't want to believe it. Neither did I. Owen met my eyes, and I saw my own regret reflected there. But here's the thing, Bella. When you told me the truth that day on the courthouse steps, part of me wasn't surprised. Part of me had been waiting for that confirmation for months, maybe years. I was just too scared to look for it myself. We sat in silence for a moment, absorbing the weight of our mutual acknowledgement. We had noticed the signs but ignored them because facing the truth was too painful. I'm not saying this to make excuses, Owen continued, or to assign blame. I just want you to know I wasn't completely blindsided. Some part of me knew, and I chose to look away. We both did, I said softly. We loved people who didn't love us back and clung to that love far too long. Yeah. He reached across the table and took my hand, a simple gesture, but it felt natural. Maybe that's why this works. Us, I mean this friendship. We understand what it's like to be betrayed by someone we trusted most. And we know moving forward doesn't mean pretending the past didn't happen. I looked at our intertwined fingers, at the warmth of his hand, and felt something shift inside me. Not romance, not yet, but recognition that this connection was real, valuable, and worth protecting. Thank you for telling me, I said. For being honest. Thank you for not running away when I did, he replied. I wasn't sure you'd want to keep seeing me after knowing I suspected and stayed silent. Owen, I said, squeezing his hand, we've both spent years keeping quiet about what mattered. I think it's time we start telling each other the truth, even when it's hard. He nodded, his expression softening. Yeah, you're right. We finished dinner that night with a lightness I hadn't felt in months. The confession had been painful, but also freeing. The illusions that had sustained our previous lives were gone, replaced by something more honest, more real. And in that honesty, I discovered a freedom I hadn't known I was missing. While Owen and I were forming an unexpected friendship, Tyler and Fiona watched their lives unravel. Their affair's exposure brought consequences they hadn't foreseen. Tyler's reputation at work suffered. In corporate accounting, discretion and trustworthiness were prized. A man who betrayed his wife and best friend was not someone clients wanted handling their finances. Promotion stalled. Responsibilities were reduced. The partnership track he had been pursuing for years suddenly felt much more distant. Fiona's situation deteriorated even further. Her part-time role at the marketing firm vanished when the owner, a woman who had once been cheated on by her husband decades earlier, decided she did not want someone like Fiona representing her business. The art world Fiona had hoped to join also rejected her after a few gallery owners heard unflattering rumors about her. She ended up folding clothes at a department store for minimum wage, while her dreams of artistic success quietly faded. The real turning point came when Tyler and Fiona tried to formalize their relationship. They had assumed that once their marriages ended and the scandal subsided, they could finally be together openly. They hoped to turn their affair into something legitimate, something that might justify the pain they had caused. About 2 months after my divorce was finalized, they moved in together into a small apartment on the outskirts of Memphis, a far cry from the comfortable homes they had left behind. Within 3 weeks, misery set in. I learned about it through the grapevine, through mutual acquaintances who couldn't resist sharing gossip. Tyler and Fiona argued constantly. Their relationship, stripped of secrecy and excitement, revealed a stark truth. Without the thrill of forbidden passion and the escape from their former homes, what remained was habit, not love, convenience, not connection. Owen observed one evening as we walked along the riverfront, the lights of downtown Memphis reflecting on the dark water. They never truly knew each other. They knew the fantasy, the secret meetings, the stolen moments, the idea of each other. Reality is entirely different. Do you feel sorry for them? I asked, genuinely curious. He paused before replying. I feel sorry for what they could have been, for the people Fiona and Tyler might have become with different choices. But for who they are, for what they actually did. No. They made their choices. They must live with them. I nodded, understanding. Early on, I had tormented myself with questions. Could I have been more attentive, more interesting, more something? Would that have stopped Tyler from straying? Over time, those questions faded, replaced by the clear recognition that Tyler and Fiona's choices were their own. They had entered each other's arms willingly and had to face the consequences. What about you? Owen asked softly. How do you feel about everything now? I reflected before answering. I feel lighter, I admitted. It's like I've been carrying this weight for years without realizing it. And now it's gone. The marriage, the pretending, the constant effort to make something work that was never going to work. It's exhausting looking back. Now, I get to discover who I am without all of that. Who I want to be, what I really want from life, instead of what I thought I should want. I smiled, surprised at how genuine it felt. It's scary, but also exciting. Owen returned the smile, a warmth in his eyes. We walked in silence after that, the river beside us, the city rising around us. Two people who had started as strangers, connected through marriage, and somehow became friends through divorce. The path here had been painful and twisted, but I could not regret it. The truth, as devastating as it had been to Sharon here, had set us both free. And in that freedom, we discovered possibilities neither of us had imagined when trapped in marriages built on lies. The courthouse steps seemed like a lifetime ago, yet I remembered Owen's face when I told him the truth, the way his world collapsed in a single sentence. I had given him a gift that day, even if it hadn't felt like one at the time reality. And with reality came the chance to build something better. We both had that chance. The question was, what would we do next? The divorce was finalized on a gray Tuesday in November, exactly 4 months after I had filed the papers on the courthouse steps. I sat in the lawyer's office as the judge's signature was reviewed, marking the final legal separation from Tyler. One might expect grief or anger, a dramatic response to the end of a 6-year relationship for years of marriage, and a partnership I once believed would last a lifetime. Instead, I felt peace. Tyler had contested nothing. The evidence of his affair, combined with his own guilt, made him compliant in ways he never would have been otherwise. I walked away with the equity from our house, my retirement accounts intact, and a clean break with no financial ties left between us. It was more than fair, it was freedom. Owen's divorce took longer, complicated by questions about dividing assets and their shared home. By December, he too was legally single, standing on the other side of his marriage with the same mixture of relief and uncertainty I had felt weeks earlier. Our celebration was simple, take-out Chinese in my new apartment. I had moved to Overton Park, into a bright 2-bedroom with hardwood floors and sunlight streaming through the windows. It was smaller than Tyler's house, but it was mine in a way nothing had been for years. To new beginnings, Owen said, raising his container of orange chicken in a mock toast. To surviving, I replied, tapping mine against his. And to terrible decisions by terrible people that somehow led us here, he added. He laughed, a real laugh that crinkled the corners of his eyes. I'll drink to that metaphorically, because this tea isn't exactly champagne. We ate in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from knowing someone well enough that words aren't always necessary. Over the past months, Owen had become the first person I spoke to about anything, good or bad. He knew my coffee order, favorite movies, and my irrational fear of pigeons. I knew his quirks too, his tendency to overthink his nervous puns, the way he drummed his fingers on tables while thinking. "Can I ask you something?" Owen said, setting down his food. "Of course. When you told me the truth that day on the courthouse steps, were you scared?" I admitted I was terrified. I didn't know how he would react, whether he would believe me, blame me, or completely fall apart. Part of me felt guilty for shattering his world, even though I knew it needed to happen. "I'm glad you did it," he said quietly. Though it had been the worst moment of my life hearing those words. "I'm glad you told me." "Really? Really," he confirmed, meeting my eyes with something warm, steady, and undeniably tender. "Because if I hadn't, I would still be living a lie, married to someone who didn't love me, still wondering why nothing felt right." "And now?" I asked. "Now I get to choose what comes next." "That's a gift, Bella. You gave me that." I felt warmth at his words. "I think we gave each other that," I said. "Neither of us could have done this alone." "No, we couldn't have," he agreed. The air between us shifted, charged with something unspoken. I noticed how close we were sitting, his hand just inches from mine. My heart fluttered, recognizing something I hadn't expected. But neither of us moved. We didn't name it. We simply sat in the warmth of my new apartment, letting the moment exist. Definitions could wait. For now, it was enough. Over the following months, what began as shared healing became something else entirely, unplanned and unexpected. Owen and I saw each other regularly. Our friendship deepened with every conversation, meal and late-night call. We talked about everything and nothing. Our pasts, our futures, the scars from our marriages, and the hopes we still held. Gradually, I realized my feelings for him had changed. It wasn't a single moment, but a slow awareness, like sunrise creeping over the horizon until everything is bathed in light. I found myself thinking about him when we were apart, wanting to share the small moments of my day, noticing my pulse quicken when his name appeared on my phone, smiling at messages that weren't even particularly funny. I tried to reason it away at first. It was too soon, too complicated. Owen had been Tyler's best friend. A romantic relationship with him seemed impossible without the shadow of the past. But the more time I spent with him, the less those objections mattered. Owen wasn't Tyler's friend anymore. That relationship had collapsed along with everything else in my life. What Owen and I had created together, a bond formed in the aftermath of shared pain, was not about the people who had hurt us. It was about us, just us. At first, I stayed silent. I was too afraid of jeopardizing what we had, of risking the friendship that had become the cornerstone of my new life. But the tension between us became harder to ignore, the lingering glances, the accidental touches we never pulled away from, the conversations that sometimes dissolved into silences that spoke louder than words. The turning point came on a spring evening, almost a year after I had filed for divorce. Owen and I were at his new apartment, a modest midtown space decorated with photographs of landscapes from his weekend hikes. We were watching a forgettable comedy, not really paying attention, when his hand found mine in the dark. I looked at him, he looked at me, and months of unspoken feelings reached their limit. "Bella," he whispered, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to promise you won't run away before I finish." My heart raced so loudly I thought he could hear it. "I promise." He drew a deep breath. "I think I'm falling in love with you. I know it sounds crazy. We started this as two people surviving a disaster, and I never imagined it could become more. But somewhere along the way, you became the person I want to speak to every morning and the last voice I want to hear at night. I can't pretend this is just friendship when my heart knows it's more." His words washed over me. Part of me had expected this, had secretly hoped for it, even as I told myself it was impossible. "Owen," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "I'm falling in love with you too." The smile that lit up his face was unforgettable. When he leaned in and kissed me, gentle, tentative, full of promise, I realized everything we had endured, the pain, betrayal, and heartbreak, had led us exactly where we were meant to be in each other's arms. Finally home. 3 years later, I stood in a small chapel on the outskirts of Memphis, wearing a simple white dress and holding a bouquet of wildflowers. Owen waited at the altar, tears in his eyes, unashamedly showing his emotions. As I walked toward him, the weight of everything that had brought us here hit me fully. Our guests were few, but meaningful. My parents sat in the front row, my mother dabbing at her eyes, my father beaming with pride I hadn't seen since childhood. My sister was my maid of honor, arriving from Nashville the night before with champagne and a speech she refused to let me preview. Owen's brother stood beside him as best man, a quiet presence I had come to love over years of family dinners and holidays. No one from our old lives was present, no mutual friends from the time Tyler and Fiona had been part of our world. That chapter was closed, sealed away, powerless over us. Tyler and Fiona's story had ended as poorly as it began. Their relationship collapsed within a year, undone by the same selfishness and dishonesty that had fueled their affair. Tyler moved to another state, taking a lower-level role at a smaller firm, fading into the obscurity he always feared. I heard he never remarried, and his reputation never fully recovered. Fiona fared worse. Her attempts to rebuild her career repeatedly failed, and the art world that once seemed promising rejected her, knowing her more for scandal than talent. She became isolated and bitter, estranged from friends and family, unable to forgive her betrayal of Owen. Last I heard, she lived alone in a small town, working a job she disliked, reflecting on where it had all gone wrong. I would be lying if I said I felt nothing upon learning this. There was a flicker of satisfaction, a sense that justice had been quietly served. But mostly I felt indifference. Their lives were no longer my concern. Their choices had brought their consequences, while I had moved on to something far greater than anything they could have taken from me. Standing at the altar, gazing at the man who had begun as a stranger, become a friend, and ultimately transformed into the love of my life, I realized that the sentence I had spoken on the courthouse steps all those years ago was more than just a revelation of truth. It had acted as a catalyst, a beginning disguised as an ending. "I love you," Owen said as we exchanged vows, his voice thick with emotion. "Not in spite of everything that happened, but because of the person you became through it. You've shown me what courage truly looks like, what honesty really means, and what it feels like to be fully seen and loved for exactly who you are." "I love you too," I replied, my tears flowing freely. "You've taught me that starting over doesn't erase the past. It allows us to build something new from the lessons it offered. And I cannot imagine building this life with anyone but you." When he kissed me, sealing our promises with a tenderness that still made my heart race after all these years, I heard my mother crying, my sister cheering, and my father clearing his throat in that familiar attempt to hide his emotions. The sentence that had once shattered our lives had also set us free. It destroyed 2 marriages built on lies and created room for something authentic, something honest, something worth fighting for. As I walked out of the chapel with my husband's hand in mine, I realized that the revenge I had never sought consciously had arrived in the most unexpected way. Not through anger or vindication, but through joy, peace, and a love that Tyler and Fiona, with all their schemes and betrayals, would never understand. Looking back on everything, from the devastating discovery to the courthouse steps, to the slow, miraculous construction of a new life, I understood that the best revenge was not causing them pain. It was refusing to let their choices dictate my future. It was taking the ruins they left behind and turning them into the foundation of something beautiful. I stepped into the Memphis afternoon with Owen by my side, ready to start the next chapter of a story that had begun with betrayal and ended in a love I had once thought impossible. The journey through heartbreak and healing had proven that truth, no matter how painful, was always preferable to comfortable lies. And the life ahead of us, built on honesty, trust, and the kind of partnership I had always dreamed of, was living proof that sometimes the worst endings can lead to the most remarkable beginnings.